that these images, the design, as it were, of a God, of the sense presence, can actually be produced by stimulation of the right temporal lobe is extremely important. Now, what I want to do is, I'm going to sort of, because we started later, the video lasted a bit longer, I want to as it were, hasten over the summary of the sort of connection of the situation. And then what I want to do is I want to leave you with something to think about during the coffee, because are we all in the state of caffeine depletion? Are we all getting slightly? Okay. So we need give me just 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll take our coffee break, and then we'll continue. You can natter among yourselves, and then we'll continue after coffee. All of this is extremely important. It is extremely important that the image of God and the instructions of God can be produced by the stimulation of the right temporal lobe, because messages and instructions from God or the gods have been such an important part of human history. We are, as I said earlier, fabulous at collaboration and aggression, and as Michael said, it's the limbic system that is extremely important, and the temporal lobes, or the medial aspects of the temporal lobes, are part of the limbic system. When Michael mentioned that when he did his PPI, the Personal Philosophy Inventory, he asked this question, whatever it was, question 163, I think, or whatever it was, something like that. If God told me to, I would kill somebody. And I think they only had the two choices, yes, no. There wasn't a say, no, yes by boring the arse off him, or whatever it is. It was just yes or no. And of all populations, all student populations in Laurentian, the percentage that ticked yes was 7%. Almost doubled if it was males, and much more than tripled if it was males who had frequent religious observances, who went to a church or temple or place of worship more than once a week. And very, very, very interesting indeed. That's why this stuff matters. Because, to put it very simply, instructions from God have a royal road into the limbic system and providing aggression. And we, as a species, are extremely good at aggression. I might come back to this after the coffee break, but myths and fables are a brilliant way, as Joseph Campbell said, of us learning. Not only learning the meaning of experience, but also learning moral codes, moral and ethical codes. We learn that from fables. I mean, the simplest one, immediate comparison is Santa Claus. Santa Claus gives you the toys if you're good and rich, and coal if you're poor, right? And Santa Claus knows whether you've been good or bad. You don't, but Santa Claus does. It's a brilliant way of imparting an entire moral code of goodness and badness to the young child, very simply. I'll come back to this later on, that ethical codes are basically a complex set of rules to stop us bumping into each other, and traffic lights are a good analogy. Traffic lights work not because there's magic in red or magic in green, but because we all agree that when it's red we stop, and when it's green we go, except of course in Montreal. You've been there and survived. It's impressive. I'm going to come back to this too, but I want to leave you with one thought. This is to discuss over coffee. Michael and I have designed a study, and I think it's a really important study, to prove once and for all whether stimulation of the right temporal lobe does genuinely create the sensation of the sense presence, as has been discussed. You've got a huge number of studies, all published in refereed journals. But what we wanted to do is literally a double-blind crossover study. Those of you who are medical students will understand that. The volunteers, whoever they are, and if you sign up and you get your $2 ticket to the regiment, you can be a volunteer. You go into Michael's, into the Faraday cage, you put on the coron helmet, and you would then be subjected to 4, as it were, episodes of stimulation. 2 of them would be placebo. They would be dummies. You'd not turn the electricity on. 2 of them would be active. And Michael said, we can talk about this after coffee too, that with using a batched file technique, he's identifying the pattern that is best for that particular individual. So, if Fred gets off best on this pattern, this is the pattern that Fred would be objected to. If Susan gets off that pattern, Susan would get that pattern. So each of the subjects would get 4. 2 of them would be sham, dummy, placebo. 2 of them would be active. And they would be administered in a random order, so that there would be you wouldn't know whether you were getting the sham or the real. And the person who actually turns on the electricity or doesn't turn off or doesn't turn on the electricity, it would not be Michael, it would not be anyone associated, it would just be the person whose job is to turn on, and that person wouldn't be allowed to communicate anything to anybody else. They even be in another room, and they either turn it off or they turn it on. And at the end of the experience, at the end of each experience, the subject would be given a questionnaire. What did you see? And maybe a visual analog scale or something like that. And how strongly did you feel? And what did you know? Was it strong emotion or weak emotion? And what was the emotion? And then we would probably videotape maybe 5 or 6 minutes in which the patient, as it were, the patient subject, gives an open description of what they actually feel. That study, I think, is of exceptional importance. And we can't think of a good acronym for it, but we thought the sense presence in the temporal lobe, or the SPIT study. Probably because after it's published, if it does actually show anything, a very large number of people would line up to spit on Michael, preferably Michael, and me if I'm wearing my other jacket. So I'm going to leave that image up, and I'm going to ask Justin to tell you some of the goodies that you're going to get in the intermission, and then you go and intermit, and then come back in 15 minutes or so. So Justin, try to.
Kind of heavy.
Questions that came up in the intervals, people asked me. And one observation, I think it was someone over here, made a really important observation, which I'm going to ask Michael to address in a moment or two. The east-west thing, facing eastward. And he made the point, of course, that this does, as it were, underpin Feng Shui. Which is right. That it could easily be that what we regard as a belief or a fashion, have the door facing east or whatever it is, Feng Shui, all the traditions are actually based on neurophysiology, in the same way in which traffic lights may be actually based on physiology, that we may actually recoil from something that is coloured the same colour as blood, because that's a very useful signal for all herd animals. I mean, if you have an antelope lying on the ground daubed with red, the colour of blood, other antelopes will, by reflex, run away from it, which is a very, very useful signal. And it may well be that we've incorporated that into our traffic lights, that we actually like red as a stop signal, and we like green, which is meant to be grass and fertility and all of that, as a go signal. And the other point was that somebody asked us, which we will address in a moment or two, about psychic experiences, and are they? And I just wanted to tell one, because I think it's kind of relevant to this this particular audience. This happened to me 9 years ago on a Saturday. It was Saturday. It was about 3 a.m. in Canada, which, for reasons that I'm now going to mention, would be about it was about 3:30, so about 8:30 in Rome, in Italy. And in this particular dream, I was remote viewing, and I was hovering over a piazza in Rome where I had actually been, and I recognised the fountain and everything like that. And there were a family, an Italian family, who were great friends of mine who I knew very well. And I knew the person I knew very well, and her brother, and I remembered her brother and her husband, and her mother wasn't there. Which was a very, very significant thing. And I happened to have her phone number, and by coincidence, a couple of days later, I telephoned her, and I asked her where she and her brother Fausto and her husband were at that exact moment, 8:30, on that particular Saturday morning. And you may call it a coincidence or not, but at that particular moment, at that exact instant, Gemma and her husband were both in Berlin. And her mother was not dead, Tiny Tim, and her brother, I think, was in Los Angeles. And now, that is an incredible experience. I can't explain it, but I just give it to you as a phenomenon. For all of the times you said, I thought of Uncle Ernest, and he telephoned me the following day. Well, he telephones you every day. You see what I mean? I just make it a point. There is a denominator, as well. So I just want to go back to a couple of things on this slide. And one of them is to reinforce what Justin was saying earlier. The TSA, as you know, has only been going about 9 months, but it's incredible the amount of achievement. And the audience being here is absolutely remarkable. And I say very genuinely, gratitude to Don Cullen for introducing me to the students, Justin and Elaine and Jenny and Suzanne Peterson. And we've actually really got something started. This, just as Justin said, may actually happen. We've got people who want to donate, who want to create a centre for free thought. If it happens, and I think it will, there will be many, as it were, weekly or monthly events. And I'm saying this now, and I've sort of hinted at it beforehand, I would certainly go there once a month and run a monthly discussion group on these kind of issues. So, just the three of you so far, but it's a great one. So I want to, it's going to be called the Centre for Free Thought, and stay tuned. Justin will email you. Oh, and just in case, by the way, just genuinely, I'm sorry, before that. So I think the Humanist Association of Canada, all students who are members of the TSA and are full-time students get free membership of the HAC. We recently passed that through the board. I can't remember what I am. Oh, I can remember what I am, and I don't want to. But President Emeritus, I think it's called. And we all had a virtual board meeting, and we voted that this should be the case. That all members of the TSA who would like to be student members of the HAC will get that for free. So I'm very, very pleased about that. Now, I want to go back a little bit. And I think this is the key. The key sort of image of the whole thing. And this is what I want to focus our discussion and our thoughts about. And in a moment or two, when I finish talking about this, Michael will come up and we will take questions and discussions from anybody. They can be comments, they can be discussions or points for discussion. Justin is going to moderate, and we've given an incredible limit. You're only allowed to talk for 45 minutes, seconds. So he's going to cut you off after 45 seconds, and then me and Michael will only be allowed to talk for a couple of minutes back, but we hope to get the discussion going. I would like you to focus on all of the points that we covered, the fantastic stuff about the way the right temporal lobe processes the God image, which is an extremely important fact, about the different experiences that are associated with right temporal lobe, about the study that we're actually proposing. I really would like input that, and in particular, my own major bugbear, which is why religious belief is such a brilliant stimulus to aggression. But why so many religious wars have been fought over the last few millennia, and why it's so easy to stir up hate between people who allegedly worship the same God, and the same God has told both groups, both warring camps, not to kill. The image in the 14th century, what is of God saying to the Pope, thou shalt not kill, except the Albigensians. I really hate them. Get rid of them. Bunch of godless. Oh, okay, I'll kill them. The idea of killing in the name of God, who instructs thou shalt not kill, is one of the great sort of real contradictions of human history. And as I've said earlier, I'll go back one slide, I think, and go back to that slide. This is the point. That I think that non-theists, people who don't believe that there is a God who issued instructions, can accept what all ethicists accept anyway, that ethics, moral codes, are basically a set of rules to guide human behavior. And as I said earlier, they are no more than traffic lights. Their power is not magic, their power is in the power imbued in them by universal agreement. If we all agree to stop at red, then the red traffic light works. If some of us say, well, green is a good light to stop at, and I'll drive through the red, we have a very serious problem. It's called Dublin, is what it's called. There is a serious problem, and we have that difficulty. What we need to do is to, as it were, explore what the moral codes are actually trying to do, and to universalize that plan. Sorry, I'm going to skip over that slide. Wait a minute. I'm going backwards, that's what I'm doing. I knew there was something. I'm a doctor, of course I go backwards. And this is the final point I want to leave. And this is Michael Persinger's analogy to the value of everything we've been talking about today. The value of knowing that your temporal lobes can mislead you and can provoke you into anger and aggression and killing, as well as all good emotions and beauty when you hear the Requiem Mass or whatever it is, But aggression particularly. The beauty, the value of that is exactly like the value of hurricane warnings. And as Michael said, hurricane warnings don't change the hurricane. The hurricane doesn't say, it's said on CNN that we're a real danger. Let's go over there to the Caribbean. We'll avoid New Orleans. Rubbish. The hurricane warning does not affect the hurricane. So none of this actually affects your image of God or somebody else's gods or the aliens or spirits or dead grandfather or white light or anything. What it does is to weaken the link between belief and behavior. That's what I was talking about with the mirage. And that is perhaps the most important thing. That what we can do if we know that 7% of the population would kill if God told them to. If people are saying, God told me to kill the Albigensians, or people whose surnames begin with M, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. If they know that a God instruction is likely to be, one, illusory, and likely, two, to be strongly linked to the other parts of the limbic system, including the amygdala, and actually provoke aggression, they may actually hesitate before they pick up the gun or the sword and go and kill somebody. If Persinger has said to you, listen to messages from God cautiously and don't obey them implicitly and rapidly, the person might be, God told me to go out and kill people whose surnames begin with M. Persinger said that might be a false message. They've just become Canadians, haven't they? Absolutely. So, I'll leave this slide up. I'll leave this slide up as our sort of theme, and then we can talk over it. That we all have our own beliefs. 99.9% of the world believes in a supernatural deity or deities or spirits of some description that control human destinies. The 0.1% that don't, and it doesn't matter. We're not interested in trying to convert the Pope into an atheist. I don't think, particularly the current Pope, I don't think he's likely to say, I just read Persinger's book, this is all crap, I'm going to take off my hat, take off the outfit, sell the Pope meal, and make Vatican City a woman's shelter. Not going to happen. But all that might happen is that the people who listen to some of the, for example, the teachings of the churches, might actually say these are good things, provided they don't involve killing or aggression or harm to other people. And if that happened, if they said, I'm going to take the good things from the teachings of my church or my temple or my religion, but I'm not going to take up the bad things, the slaughter, the killing and so on, because Persinger tells me that the message might be an illusory message and it might be linked to my amygdala. I'm not going to do it. Gradually, over the next maybe decades, we could probably persuade people, not at the top, but the people who are hearing the message at a lower level, that they shouldn't do that. And if we do, what we'll be achieving is on that slide. What we're actually achieving is this: believe whatever you like, but behave as if there is no supernatural deity to sort out humankind's problems for it. Thank you very much.
Hello? Okay, so we have both of our speakers on the stage, and we have a microphone down here and one up there. So if you'd like to form a line, I'll give you a couple of seconds. Line up here, please, and over there. And again, about 30 seconds if you can, 45 at the most, 50, and I ask my volunteers to cut you off. All right? That's the deal. And then our speakers will respond. All right, so let's start down here. Yes, sir.
Yes, Doctor. Can you hear me? Dr. Persinger, science deals outside the context of religion. In the phenomena that you describe, why can't this be explained in a context without reference to God? In other words, as an evolutionary development that helps us survive as human beings in this world. Can't it be explained without God?
Well, I think what I tried to do tonight is show the experimental data, and I can hypothesize that, well, think of it this way. The sense of self is a fragile process. Anxiety can devastate it. The apprehension about the dissolution of the self, death of the self, is a powerfully terrifying experience for most. If you take the sense of self, it's usually a linguistic label, I, and you pair it with something that has associations with immortality, and every culture has a word for immortality, which means it's everywhere in space and everywhere in time, call it God, Allah, whatever. All you have to do is to say, I am a part of this, I'm a child of this, make that connection. And if you reduce your anxiety, the subjective experience of anxiety is decreased once that connection is made. You can see how powerful it can be to believe in it, because the more you believe in it, the more your anxiety is reduced. And when somebody challenges that belief, they're actually challenging your personal insurance for immortality. And I suspect that what has happened is that God belief is a cognitive virus, a true cognitive virus, in the sense it begins when you're young, your parents teach you, whenever you're aversive, whenever something happens that's fearful or apprehensive, they say, well, don't worry about it because this infinite being will take care of you. And by the time you're old enough, it ravels and integrates with your very sense of self. And by the time you're old enough to challenge it, most people don't have the courage because the existential anxiety will be incapacitated. So from an evolutionary point of view, I can see that the God belief emerged. So the sense of self, at least in those days, could mature.
Thank you, Dr. Persinger. Let's move on to somebody on the balcony, please.
I have a two-part question. In the film, the person that experienced a similar phenomenon, would it be possible to go back to his location and look at the fields or whatever might have caused that to see if it...
Sure could. The complexity of the fields is usually just on the more modern range of geomagnetic instrumentation magnetometers. Of course you could. In fact, there's really no secret to science. Science, of course, has a method. Experiment is the most powerful tool associated with it. But what we do, I guess I'll confess, we go out and we measure nature, and then we duplicate in the laboratory. So effectively, you're right. The optimal thing to do would be go out into the actual setting, measure what's going on if it's still there, digitize it, and simulate it within the laboratory setting.
My second question, I'll be very quick. That's fine. I guess because this is public knowledge, I don't have to license it. If I want to take this technology and put it in shopping malls as a form of entertainment, I'm okay to do that then.
Well, effectively, of course.
Good.
I suggest that as opposed to using a DAC system, which is the more complicated copyright and patent things, And I'll say this to you because I assume you also have responsibility. I assume everybody has responsibility. Is that you can do very similar things with a wave file. And you young guys know how to use wave files. Digitize it, wave file, output it into a basic headphone, slight modification of the solenoids. But remember, total responsibility is the price you pay for the privilege of experimentation. This is a technology that you have. You just have to be able to modify what you already have. You don't have to be fancy with our equipment.
Okay, thank you. Let's return down here then.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for this wonderful lecture. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I wanted to know if you had any experience with telepathy and the influence of the directed thoughts that could influence individual and common a group of people.
Oh, I haven't. No, telepathy is very interesting. I know large numbers of studies have been done. Both telepathy, in which people try and test whether you can actually transmit a thought, and you know they use the one in the wavy lines in the triangle. Have you ever seen Ghostbusters, by the way? You know, a great way to meet women, according to that. But what is fascinating is both telepathy and psychokinesis have both been very, very strongly investigated in the last 20 years. And a lot of the experiments are purported to show that people could influence, for example, electrical circuits and make a boat, a little model boat, move across water. And that was a very, very famous example of psychokinesis. And it was actually held up by a chap called Professor Taylor in London as a major thing. And then somebody said, what's that little drop of water appearing on the dome? The boat was floating under a dome. And they found that what was happening is that every time the person said, I'm going to move the boat, they turned the camera on to photograph it, and they turned the light on. And the light warmed the dome, and the warmth created a lovely convection current, and the little boat scudded across. And you turn the light off, and it just turn the light on, you know. And it was merely the fact that this person was thinking. So far, telepathy in transmitting complex thoughts and psychokinesis, thoughts on inanimate objects, a total and utter bust, I'm relieved to say. If it's actually proven, I have to really rethink telepathically.
Thank you, Dr. Let's return to the top, I believe.
Hi, Dr. Persinger?
Yes.
Up here. There are so many questions I want to ask you that 45 seconds will not encompass it. Do you have an online forum anywhere?
No, I don't.
Lucky man. Anyway.
Send it telepathically.
This is the psychic joke of the day. You got it, okay. So anyway, have you thought, to me, the twofold question is, the brain is not just an electrical organ, it's an electrochemical organ. The interaction of electrical signals and chemical signals are, as far as I can tell, so intertwined as to be nearly, well, never mind my words. Let me ask you, have you seen that chemical signatures can create the same effects that you're creating magnetically and electronically? And secondly, and perhaps most importantly, do you realize the implications for magnetic analgesia as a therapeutic technique from this research?
Do you have 45 minutes?
I'm going back to Buffalo now.
No, actually, you're right. The brain does work both on chemical transmission and electromagnetic sequences, but ultimately when a receptor sequesters a neurotransmitter, what takes place within the cell is a series of frequency modulated changes in calcium oscillations and so forth. So ultimately it is electromagnetic pattern. And the chemistry is simply a more discrete and quantum way to get the information across. To answer your question logically from that would mean that electromagnetic fields like we're using could produce effects that are similar to psychotropic drugs, which they do. In terms of the magnetic analgesia, yes, I think there's tremendous implications. Probably one of the reasons we're not getting well funded by pharmaceutical companies. But yes, indeed, it suggests that also individuals could potentially treat their own analgesia, and the difference is the magnetic field penetrates. Magnetic fields are only forces that can penetrate tissue. Drugs are useful, they can be targeted because we've got 150 years of unbelievable technical sophistication behind it, but it still requires the blood to get there. whereas magnetic fields permeate matter, period.
Thank you, Dr. Persinger. Timothy, please.
Thanks, Justin. I have a yes/no question, and depending on the answer, I may have follow-up. Have you, in the course of your experiments and having dealt with a whole bunch of different people, have you found a situation where no matter how you vary the waveform and the timing, it produces no significant result at all?
Yes. In about 10% of the population, they're usually male, and they're not very introspective. Usually individuals who are introspection, the ability to label your internal experiences. So in other words, many of these experiences that people have are because you can label them. If you have a relatively minimal capacity to label your internal states, and we do have patients who do that, you can have a bleeding ulcer and not even realize they're having a bleeding ulcer, they don't respond to their internal states.
Okay, you anticipated my follow-up question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He said, I wanted to ask that 10%, the people who have no introspection, no insight, totally solid, rock solid temporal lobes, every single one of them are chartered accountants, right?
So now that I mentioned that, I think it's true. Yeah.
Some of my best friends are chartered accountants.
Not anymore. Gentleman at the top, please.
Question from a non-scientist. We can all see how your video helps to support your thesis, but a secondary question, mainly just out of curiosity, have you ever gone back to understand why or what could have caused the exploding light bulbs?
That's actually, you have to ask Professor Hill about that. We do know there's all kinds of very interesting natural forces. For example, I take it you've seen pictures of earthquake lights. Those are lights that show at earthquakes. There are also balls of light and other kinds of very energetic electromagnetic phenomena that occur before earthquakes. Balls of lights that generate a kilowatt output that very often occur around piezoelectric areas. If you happen to be a conductor about, you're going to get very clear current induction. So lots of natural forces out there that we're just beginning to understand. And I think to be only fair, you'd have to ask Professor Hill if he actually went back and measured that.
Okay, but obviously there is a correlation between the exploding light bulbs and whatever the family faced in terms of psychic.
Oh, well, yes, indeed. In fact, something in the environment was really occurring. I think it's pretty evident. The critical thing is what in the environment is taking place. These energies involved with exploding light bulbs aren't very large. I mean, really, it's equivalent to the amount of energy from about a Newton of force. And really, just walking across with 20 kilograms of thigh mass, you're up to already about 100, 150 newtons. So these energies that people consider to be psychic are actually quite trivial. More powerful energies are involved with simple physiology.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Down here.
Hi. I find it interesting that one person who asked a question suggested the application of this sort of technology for entertainment. To me, you could go one step further and say that it could be used for a new form of art. However, there have often been comparisons made between religious experiences and artistic experiences. However, there's also many comparisons made between artistic experiences and drug experiences. And I'm wondering, were this technology to be used for artistic experiences and artistic creations, do you see the potential for abuse such as in addiction and so on, the downsides that we have from drug use?
Every tool human beings have ever developed have been abused. What is the first thing we did with fire? We cooked our neighbor. What is the first thing we did with gunpowder? We blew up our neighbor. What's the first thing we did within 30 days of Italian fission? We dropped it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the point is, social responsibility is absolutely essential. And one of the ways we contribute to that is by making sure our data are published in scientific journals so everyone knows about it. It's just not the secret information of a few individuals.
Well said. I think we'll move back up now.
Hi, my question is this. Because you can stimulate or replicate experiences in the brain as you described, why does that necessarily mean that there is no natural occurrence of those phenomena? One second, just let me finish. No natural occurrence with legitimate cause and function and purpose in life. For example, if you were to stimulate the experience of thirst, of course, there is a very natural experience of thirst that has a definite purpose, cause, and function in our lives.
You're totally correct. I mean, there's lots of natural phenomena. In fact, it's very evident that geomagnetic activity, the nature itself, has the capacity to induce all types of experiences from, in fact, many of the ones that magnetic fields in the laboratory do, from electrical seizures to the sense presence. So you're right, there are lots of stimuli out there, and I suspect there are lots of stimuli that we have not articulated or measured yet. Those are the ones I'm concerned about. Because the more knowledge we have, the more we can predict. The more we predict, the more we understand.
Can I just add to that point, which is the fact that Michael has been able to demonstrate God's experiences when stimulating the right temporal lobe. Firstly, absolutely reflects your point that there might be other things out there, but it also doesn't disprove the existence of God if people want to believe that. Some people have already said God has designed your right temporal lobe in this way, and you can either have your temporal lobe switched on by God or switched on by Persinger. It's up to you. So it's never going to disprove the existence of a God. Some people, yeah.
I'll choose God for the time being.
Okay.
Okay, Maria?
Hi, I'm very curious, Dr. Persinger, how you came to do these experiments and what sort of upbringing did you have? Did you have a religious upbringing? And what this research has done to your way of thinking?
Well, those are lots of questions. Well, I think the primary source for the experimental work was about 15, 20 years ago. Well, I guess 20 years ago now. We had a meditator in a laboratory we were doing a routine EEG, and we found a electrical seizure of the temporal lobe. And I asked her nonchalantly, anything interesting had happened. She said, well, God was here. I could feel him all around me. It was a powerful experience for her. I didn't tell her that this was a seizure going on over the right temporal lobe. But suddenly I realized that perhaps we could bring the whole concept of studying this powerful phenomenon in the laboratory by imitating experimentally. At the time we couldn't do it, but computers came along, which had the capacity to generate all kinds of complex patterns. So then we had a chance to actually institute it experimentally. In terms of my background, I grew up in a situation, my dad was in a military setting, so I was always moving from place to place. So the ability, the advantage of that is you never develop a clean friendship system. You're always slightly on the outside, and you tend to take a look at big pictures. And from my point of view, one of the biggest pictures is why people kill each other in God's name, when in actual fact, thou shalt not kill is shown up in every discipline or every religion. So I wanted to find out why. And that my early experience, I think, helped me do that, because it allows you to step aside and look at people, not from being just independent, but from a different perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If God is the result of stimulation of the brain, how do you define reality? Every single thing you experience is some kind of stimulation of brain. So there is no way to define some stimulation over some other stimulation. So.
You're totally correct. In fact, one of the great philosophical issues is what is really out there. I mean, really, you're looking at me, right? You're looking at me right now, and really you're responding to the states of your nerves. You're not really looking at me. There are 6 synapses between your retina, between your rods and cones, and your cortex. Really, you're only aware of the states of your nerves. So the answer to that question, which is an old philosophical question, you'd have to change the microstructure of the human brain. In fact, we tried to do that with some of our animal epilepsy studies, where we induce epilepsy and change microstructurally all the various patterns to see if you change that great organ, that great rambled knot, do you change the way animals perceive and respond to the world? And in fact, it does change it. So the only way to really answer your question, we'd have to change the microstructure of the human brain. Not with a big hole in it, but with a clear microstructure.
Why do you need to change the structure of the brain if you can't justify any stimulation over some other stimulation?
Oh no, I mean, you're asking the question about what's really out there in terms of reality. Reality is there.
Is there anything out there after all?
Excuse me?
Is there anything out there after all? I mean, is there anything real?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and it seems to me that THC really increases that capacity to ask that question. But in addition to that, it's an old philosophical question, but to answer your question in its absolute sense, you have to change the microstructure of the brain. Think of it this way. You're looking at a piece of tissue under the microscope, and you're not sure it's there. What do? You keep staining it with every different kind of stain you've got, every different kind of technology you've got, it's still there after all those stains, you more or less think it's not an artifact of your stain. And the same thing happens with the brain. It may be an artifact of our brain, but to answer your question about the God experience, by the very fact that certain patterns can produce an effect, other patterns produce other emotions, tells you that you now have a chance to experimentally study the phenomenon.
We could answer add just one more point to that, which is there is pathology of the sense of reality. We may not be able to define accurately what reality is. As Michael said, that's a philosophical question. The interpretation of sense data is a huge area of philosophy. But we do know that there are people, for example, with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorders, who have disordered sense of reality. And they accept as real other things that we regard as hallucinations or voices or so on. What you can say then, and we know now from fMRI studies, where in the brain the major dysfunction is. It's an area quite difficult. I think it's the inferior mammillary bodies or somewhere like that. I've actually seen the scans and I don't fully understand them. But it's a very important point that we may not be able to define reality to everybody's satisfaction, but we can define disorders of reality related to, for example, schizophrenia. And that tells us we can't say reality is here, but we can say reality is not here. And that's the beginning of the process.
Okay, I think we're down here again.
Hello. Yes, good evening. I'd like to offer my kudos on your fine selection of pocket watch.
Thank you.
There has been a lot of discussion in this forum making the connection between the religious experience and violence connected to the religious experience. Certainly I don't deny that tends to happen, although religion is not, violence is not exclusive to religion. My question is, in your experiments on the God phenomenon, I know you said 7% have answered in questionnaires, I think, that they would kill in the name of God on average. But have you actually witnessed violence in these experiments? Have people become violent? Have there been direct violent acts on the people within the chair, for example, after experiencing this God phenomenon?
Okay. The most typical effect of bilateral stimulation, burst firing stimulation, is people feel very quiescent. If you interrupt it, they get quite irritated, all right, like you would with any kind of pleasurable effect. But those particular studies to which we referred are questionnaire studies on terms of asking people, if God told you to kill, would you in his name? That 7% would say yes. Now, a subsection of that was actually evaluated afterwards, because sometimes people just say yes for no apparent reason. And they say, yes, I believe it, because I believe in that God or that God or that God. And since he or she created the universe, he or she must be true, he or she must be accurate, so therefore I would follow their statements. So, but no, they haven't acted it out in the laboratory. This was a questionnaire study.
I see. So you haven't actually, so the theory is that if you sort of interrupted these people's very pleasant dreams, there might be violence then?
No, I'm saying that in terms of the experiences they had, those were belief systems. That's a questionnaire study. In our experiments, where people are having pleasant experiences, like any pleasant experience, like you're sleeping, somebody wakes you up, you get irritated. Right? If you're watching a comfortable TV show, interrupts, you get irritated. That kind of irritation, but that's not the same kind of violence we're talking about. Yeah.
Thank you. Our last member at the top there.
You mentioned the person meditating and had an epileptic seizure and had this great experience.
Oh, say electrical seizure, yeah.
Yes. Have you found similar phenomena where people are normally meditate or pray and can, in other words, can these phenomena be generated internally as well as from external stimulation?
Well, one thing that we've seen over the years is that individuals who have very unique altered states, including speaking in tongues, very often show spiking over the temporal lobe, right temporal lobe. And the point is, it's not pathological in a usual sense. It's just a correlate of the behavior.
Okay, and down here?
I have many questions too. I'm going to start out with a couple of them.
Please limit it just to one. We're running late. Thanks.
What factors have you looked into in your population besides their belief systems? Have you looked into the Myers-Briggs personality inventory aspects of them? And what would you attribute to be any differences, if at all, between the university population that you use and, say, the general population?
Thank you. Yes, we have looked at, we do have 16PF and some MMPI data, some Myers-Briggs. Over the years, what we find is that the classic introspective individual is the person that's typically more sensitive to the field. But we don't only use university students. We have a whole population of individuals that are special individuals that come in. They can be often, they call themselves psychics. Very often they may be individuals that have certain kinds of disorders. For example, in my clinical practice with closed head injury, individuals may have a sense presence. Over 3/4 of people with closed head injuries have a sense presence that frighten them. And they feel like they're not the individuals after the injury feel like they're not the same person as they were before the injury. They have a sense presence. If it's on the left, it's always aversive. If it's on the right, it's usually pleasant and attributed to a culturally appropriate entity. Those individuals respond well too. And in fact, Professor St. Pierre and I were waiting for one very, very famous study. It's a girl who was having these terrors. We brought her into the laboratory, said, you're going to have the same thing, potentially, but you're here, you're safe, we turned on the stimulus, she had the sense presence. You're here, you can control it. You can control this experience. So afterwards, when she had it again, it still happened when she was home in bed, it was no longer as fearful, because now she had a label that she had control over.
So Heather, related, I'm just commenting on his
quickly,
comments.
please.
And would she have an individual pattern or profile that you would use to determine how to get her to relax or control it?
Well, we didn't look at that. I mean, basically the profiles we have now, this is, remember, at the rudimentary level of development and investigation. Right now it would be like saying if we gave most people in this room a benzodiazepine, a generalized minor tranquilizer, they all more or less have the same effect. If we wanted to start looking at individual differences, then we better get into very specific medications to use a pharmacological equivalent. So in general,
do you see the potential for your method to be that particularly individualized?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Yes, we do. Theoretically, I mean, we have to test it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to take, I think, the last 5, and then we'll move on. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for both discussions. Do you believe that consciousness is produced by the brain?
Well, I don't believe in many things. I try to measure things.
I know. See, how do I phrase this?
Yeah, I understand. I understand the content.
Because
I understand the tenor of your argument. I understand the tenor of your argument. Basically, it's from our data, it indicates that and many other people have found this, that consciousness is recreated every 20, 25 milliseconds. And it's very evident by looking at some of the electroencephalographic behavior. And the reason we know that that's probably true is that when you apply circumcerebral magnetic fields going in a counterclockwise direction, such that you basically, we'll put it this way, these fields are recreated cohesively every 20 to 25 milliseconds. That's 40 to 50 hertz. If you generate a field to go against it and interfere with it, you actually produce time distortion, subjective time distortion. So I think that it's pretty evident that these electromagnetic fields generated from the brain are the correlates of consciousness and awareness.
There are many that don't believe that they believe that the brain is in the mind. So can you explain how a meditator, do you know Ken Wilber?
I don't think so.
He's very well known in the States. He's written many books. They're producing his collected volumes now. He's only 53. He can meditate, and he's hooked up to an EEG, and he produces no brain waves. Scientists would say he's dead.
Well, I would say that maybe scientists would, but neuroscientists wouldn't.
Okay.
The reason is the flat EEG. The EEG is actually only about 10 microvolts to 100 microvolts. The steady state potentials upon which they're based is about 10 to 20 millivolts. It's a difference of a factor of 1,000. When you flatten an EEG, it's like having a pool that's 100 meters. That's your steady state potential. And the EEG is a meter on top. Flattening out doesn't tell you anything except you flatten out the waves. You still have tremendous DC potentials. In fact, one of the most well-known correlates of hypnosis using DC potentials is the EEG doesn't change, but the DC drops. Okay, so in other words, a flat EEG doesn't necessarily mean what people think it means.
And what
Thank you. I'm sorry. We have to go on to the next. No, I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll answer.
Doctors Brockman and Persinger will be available following the event. All right, if you want to follow up your discussion. Well, actually, we only have this we're told. Anyways, next.
Hi, I'll try to be very quick. Professor wonderfully put why is it so important to weaken the connection between the way what people believe and how they behave. But it's also true that what people believe is very much connected with humans' sense of meaning of life and humans' ability to be active and humans' ability to make sacrifices. So I think that we could say with a high probability that if people wouldn't really behave as if there isn't some supernatural forces saying them that or this, the mankind wouldn't survive. So as putting this as weakening this connection as a goal of this lecture, as one of the goals of this lecture, do you really think that that's something good to do?
I want to ask the question this way. Most of you had first year chemistry, right? You know about oxygen and all those good things. Well, before chemistry came along, there was the idea of phlogiston. Things burn because they contain phlogiston. Phlogiston was the burning stuff. And then Lavoisier came along and said, well, actually it's oxygen. There's this chemical reaction that takes place. Because before chemistry, there was no other way to explain it except phlogiston. But once chemistry began to understand the process and show it, you didn't require phlogiston anymore. But things still keep burning.
I was going to say, can I add to that? That the burning is not dependent on phlogiston, nor is goodness dependent on religion. All you need is a handful of atheists who actually say, I really know in my heart that there isn't a God who's actually continuing, and they are leading moral lives, and you answer the question. You can be moral without God. I made a documentary with Michael, actually, about a year ago, in which I asked, I think, 5 religious leaders, a rabbi, a Sikh, a Muslim, a Hindu, and a fundamentalist Christian. And I asked every single one of them, can I be good even though I don't believe in God? Every single one of them said, yes, you can. Better if you subscribe to God, and better if you subscribe to our God. And the fundamentalist Christian, who I got along very well with, I said, I've obeyed all the 10 commandments. I really have, except I once coveted my neighbour's ox. It's because my neighbour has a fabulous ox. And she said, absolutely, if that's all you've done, you can be good without God. The fact that lots of people say, I'm good because of God, it's not necessary to be good with God if there are people without God who could be good. So that's the proof.
Not sure what the ox would say about that. All right, Eric, next question.
My question is, how long would you say that it took you to build the machine?
Well, this is a splendid question. How old are you?
10.
About twice your age. But it was slow. That's a nice question, nice technical question. I would say that it's based upon data collection, feedback, and if it wasn't for computers, I wouldn't be standing here tonight, because the computer gave us the capacity to have the complexity to imitate what the brain does.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Yes, sir?
Hello, just a quick question. Do you see potential in your technology for applications in the future to be able to pick up these types of burst signals that might be generated internally by the brain?
Well, not in my technology, because mine is application technology, but certainly we know that, some of the new radars can actually pick up information at a distance, EM information at a distance, without even sending out a signal, by looking at this soup we have around us. This electromagnetic soup from everything from cell phones to communication systems is so complex now, you can use it as a background to extract information.
Thank you.
That's probably the scariest of all the technologies.
And our final question, please.
You've been talking about extraordinary phenomena. I'd like to ask about ordinary phenomena. As people's experience has kind of ramped up, they saw lights and things like that. To what extent is it possible, or does it happen, that electromagnetic fields in our day-to-day lives affect how we experience the day?
Well, I would say that most of the time for sine waves, because just relatively redundant, unless it's really, really intense. I mean, if you have an intense enough field, you get current induction. And transcranial stimulation is a classic. But transcranial stimulation is 1,000,000 times more intense than what we use. It's a Tesla field. But in terms, you're right, you're totally correct. We know there are now people who, for lack of a more appropriate term, are sensitive to electromagnetic field background. There's no doubt about it. You can demonstrate in the laboratory. Now, whether this is something that our population is developing because of who knows, as we know, one of the most interesting features is that allergies are becoming more frequent because we really have less worms. Yes. I mean, for the mast cells that are involved with dealing with worms that our species had for millions of years, there's less. And so as the worms go down, the allergies and responses go up. So that's the price we pay for having no worms. So the point is, when we have an environment that's so electromagnetically dense, and we have all of these, most of you are alive today because of medication. We have a very, very highly selected genetic pool. All kinds of things could occur that would make some people very, very sensitive to ambient fields that their grandparents would never even consider important.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to our 2 raffles, but first I just want to thank all of you for your feedback and your questions, and another round of applause for our distinguished speakers.